Welcome to the Before AGI podcast. All right, diving in today to a concept that I think is so crucial in AI and data privacy. It's called differential privacy. And for our listeners, you guys are really plugged into the AI world. So understanding how we can actually analyze all this data responsibly and make sure that people's privacy, individuals, isn't compromised, that's really important, right? You want to get to the core of these ideas quickly and fully, and that's what we're going to try to do today. We've got some interesting sources here to unpack this idea of differential privacy, figure out how it works, why it matters so much, especially now with all this data flying around, and see where it's actually being used out there in the real world. So we're going to be looking at everything from the very basic definitions to the mathematical kind of tricks, the trade-offs involved, and the strengths it offers.
Absolutely. You can really think about differential privacy as this way to, unlock these insights that are hidden in these massive data sets that we have, but also be this guardian, right, for the individuals whose information is part of that data. It's all about striking that balance, learning valuable things without having to kind of peer into any one person's private information.
Okay, I like that. Unlocking insights while guarding individual privacy. So can we break that down a bit? In the simplest terms, what is differential privacy really all about?
Well, at its heart, differential privacy is this mathematically rigorous framework, and it really ensures that when we're looking at data and we're analyzing it, the results we get aren't significantly affected just by having one person's information in there or not. It's kind of like, studying the forest without needing to know every single tree in detail.
Okay, I see. So it's not about just making the data anonymous in the traditional way, right? Like just taking out names and stuff.
Right, exactly. You see, these traditional ways of anonymizing data, like removing names or replacing them with codes, they just don't really cut it anymore, especially in today's world where data is so interconnected, right? You can think about it. Even if you take out a name, there might be other pieces of information there that, if you put them together, could still point back to a specific person. So differential privacy, it comes in and kind of shifts the approach. Instead of just trying to scrub the data clean, it adds in a little bit of noise. And this noise is carefully calibrated, and it's added either to the data itself or to the results of the analysis. And you can think of this noise as a shield almost, providing a quantifiable guarantee that individual privacy is actually being protected.
Quantifiable, that's a good word. So it's not just hope, it's something that you can actually measure, right?
Exactly. And to kind of understand how strong this guarantee is, we use this concept called adjacent data sets. So picture this. You have two versions of the same data set. The only thing that's different between them is that one has your data in it and the other one doesn't. And what differential privacy does is it ensures that any analysis that you do on these two data sets will give you results that are statistically very similar.
So whether my information is in there or not, the big picture, the overall findings, they won't change too much. Is that it?
That's the basic idea, yeah. And if you want to put it a bit more formally, we talk about a differential privacy, often called Epsilon differential privacy.
Wow.
Mathematically, what this means is, for those two data sets we were just talking about, those adjacent ones, the chance of getting a specific result from our analysis, it's going to be super close, almost the same, regardless of which data set we use. And how close those results are, that's defined by this parameter. It's called epsilon.
Okay, so this epsilon thing, it sounds pretty important. What's it telling us exactly?
Well, you can kind of imagine epsilon like a dial, and this dial controls the level of privacy. So if you have a small epsilon value, what that means is you have a stronger privacy guarantee, because it makes the outcomes from those two adjacent data sets even more similar, right? But here's the catch. A really small epsilon, it might mean you have to add in so much noise that the results of your analysis, they might not be as accurate or as useful. On the other hand, if you have a larger epsilon, you'll get more accurate results, but the privacy guarantee won't be quite as strong. So it's a balancing act, between privacy and how useful those results are.
So finding that right setting for epsilon, that's really crucial. I get it. And I've also come across this differential privacy thing. What's with that extra delta?
That's approximate differential privacy. So that delta is a small extra piece to this. What it does is it basically acknowledges that, there's this tiny, tiny chance that the privacy guarantee could be broken a little bit beyond what epsilon specifies. It's like a little wiggle room, right? And this relaxation, by adding in delta, it often lets us get more useful data, particularly when you're doing those really complex analyses. It's kind of like allowing this super small chance of a privacy breach. And we want to keep this chance incredibly small, like much smaller than 1 divided by the size of the data set. And when delta is 0, we're back to that pure adifferential privacy.
So it seems like with epsilon and delta, it's almost like you're managing some kind of resource, like a budget.
Mm.
Is there actually a concept of a privacy budget?
You hit the nail on the head there. That's a really insightful way to think about it. Every time you do a differentially private analysis on a data set, you're essentially spending some of that privacy budget, right? And it's often measured in terms of epsilon. And if you keep doing more and more analyses on that same data, the total privacy loss, it starts to add up. So you really have to manage that budget carefully, especially when you're running multiple queries or you're releasing multiple results that all come from that same underlying data. You have to make sure the overall privacy risk stays at an acceptable level.
So we get the idea of what we're trying to do with differential privacy, but how do we actually make it happen? Like, what are the mathematical tools that we use?
So two of the most basic techniques are the Laplace mechanism and the Gaussian mechanism. Now, the Laplace mechanism, that's often used when you want to achieve pure adifferential privacy. The idea is to add in a special kind of random noise. And this noise, it comes from a Laplace distribution, which if you can picture it, looks like this sharp peak in the middle and then the sides kind of fall off quickly, like really steep slopes. And this noise, we add it to the real, true result of a query.
And how do you decide how much of this Laplace noise to mix in?
Well, that depends on something called the sensitivity of the query, and it also depends on that epsilon value, that privacy parameter we talked about. Now, sensitivity, we represent it with WAF, and it basically tells you the biggest possible change in the output of the query if just one person's data is either added or removed from the data set. The amount of Laplace noise that we add, we calculate it by taking that sensitivity and dividing it by epsilon. So if a query is super sensitive to an individual's data, we've got to add more noise to hide their contribution, make it harder to figure out.
Okay, that makes sense, yeah. The bigger the potential impact, the stronger that noise shield needs to be. And what about the Gaussian mechanism? When do you use that one?
The Gaussian mechanism is often used when you're going for approximate differential privacy. Instead of Laplace noise, we add in noise that comes from a Gaussian distribution, that bell curve shape we all know and love from stats class. Now, the amount of noise here, it's determined by the L sensitivity of the function and our chosen epsilon and delta values. And the Gaussian mechanism, it's often the preferred one, especially when you're dealing with data that has a lot of dimensions. And the L sensitivity can sometimes be lower than the L sensitivity that's used with the Laplace mechanism. This can lead to less noise being added for a similar level of privacy. And it also works well with more advanced techniques for combining privacy loss over many queries.
We've been talking about sensitivity a lot here. It seems like it's super important. Can we unpack that concept a bit more? Why is it so crucial in this whole differential privacy thing?
Absolutely. Sensitivity is really at the core of how we adjust that noise level in differential privacy. It basically tells us how much influence a single person's data can have on the result of a specific analysis. If a query has high sensitivity, that means one person's info could really change the results. So we need to add in more noise to really protect their privacy. And, we often talk about global sensitivity. That's looking at the maximum change across all possible data sets that are different by just one record. For really simple queries, like counting how many people meet a certain condition, the sensitivity is usually pretty straightforward. It can change by, at most one. But for more complex queries, like if you're calculating a sum, the sensitivity could be a lot higher, especially if there are no limits on the values in the data. And in those cases, we might need to use techniques like clipping. That means we kind of set limits on the data to keep the sensitivity under control and make sure differential privacy is actually usable.
Okay, I get it. Understanding how much one person's data can affect the outcome, that's key to knowing how much noise to add in. Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about the real benefits of using differential privacy. Why is this approach so much better?
One of the biggest wins with differential privacy is that it's super strong against what we call auxiliary information. So even if someone, like an attacker, even if they have a ton of other data, the math behind differential privacy, it still holds up. The guarantees are still there. And this is a huge step forward from those traditional anonymization methods, which, they often fail because someone can take that anonymized data, combine it with other info that's out there, and figure out who the individuals are. Differential privacy, it puts up a much stronger wall against those kinds of attacks.
So even if someone has a lot of background knowledge, they still can't easily pick out an individual's data from the results.
That's exactly it. It's built to protect against what we call linkage attacks. That's a core strength. That added noise, it makes it really, really hard to link those records back to specific individuals, even if someone tries to combine the differentially private output with other data sets they might have.
Sounds like a much more robust way to handle privacy, especially thinking about the future.
It really is. And another fantastic thing is something called post-processing immunity. So imagine you take the results from your differentially private analysis and then you do some more calculations on it, or maybe some other kind of analysis. Well, guess what? The result is still differentially private, and those privacy guarantees, they either stay the same or they even get better. You're not going to lose privacy by doing more with the output.
That's incredibly useful. Think about researchers who might need to use the same data for multiple analyses.
Exactly. And let's not forget the fundamentals. Differential privacy, it's rooted in these mathematical guarantees about privacy. We can actually assign a number to the level of privacy we're achieving, and we do that through that epsilon parameter we talked about. So the odds of seeing any particular outcome from our analysis, they differ by, at most, and here's the math part, e raised to the power of epsilon, between those two adjacent data sets. Now, as that epsilon gets closer and closer to zero, those odds, they become almost identical, practically indistinguishable. And that's a really strong level of privacy. And this all adds up to this powerful defense against what we call reconstruction attacks, where someone tries to recreate the original data set, and also re-identification attacks.
So all this sounds great, but where are we actually seeing this in the real world? Who's using differential privacy?
Well, we're seeing it pop up more and more. A big one is the U.S. Census Bureau. They have actually implemented differential privacy to keep the demographic data they collect confidential while still being able to give out those essential statistics about the population so they can share these valuable insights without exposing individual responses.
Wow. Applying it to something as huge and sensitive as a census, that must have been quite a project.
Oh yeah, it was a big one. And it shows that you can actually use differential privacy on a really massive scale. And we're seeing big tech companies get on board too, like Apple, Google, LinkedIn. They're all integrating differential privacy into their systems. For instance, Apple uses it to improve things like QuickType, those emoji suggestions, and Spotlight search. They're collecting usage data, but they're doing it in a way that protects privacy. Google's been using it for different things too, like gathering those usage statistics and even looking at how people were moving around during the COVID-19 pandemic, but without revealing any individual movements. And LinkedIn, they're applying it to understand hiring trends and how the labor market's changing, all without exposing any individual user data.
It's great to see these major tech players adopting it. It shows that it's not just a theoretical idea, it's a tool that can actually be used.
Absolutely, and it doesn't stop there. Differential privacy is getting bigger in federated learning too. That's a way to train machine learning models on sensitive data that's spread across lots of devices, like our smartphones, without actually having to gather all that data in one place. They use local differential privacy applied to each device before those updates are sent to the central server, adding this extra layer of protection. And we're even seeing potential in healthcare, finance, and social science research. It's really enabling secure data analysis in areas where privacy is absolutely essential.
So it's got all these advantages and real-world uses, but what about the bumps in the road? What are some of the challenges with differential privacy?
Well, the biggest challenge, like we touched on earlier, is this trade-off between privacy and how useful the results are. If you really want super strong privacy, you're going to need a really small epsilon. But that often means adding in a lot of noise, and that can make those results less accurate and less useful overall. Finding the right balance, well, it really depends on the situation. There's no magic formula.
So deciding on that epsilon value, it's a big decision. It can really affect how valuable the analysis is.
Absolutely. And choosing those epsilon and delta values, that's a delicate process. There aren't always clear guidelines. You need to really understand the data, the specific analysis you're doing, and the level of privacy risk you're willing to accept. Another big challenge is figuring out the sensitivity of those complex queries, especially when you're dealing with machine learning models. If you overestimate the sensitivity, you might add in too much noise, which makes the results less useful. But if you underestimate it, you could weaken those privacy guarantees without even realizing it.
What about when you're working with small data sets? Does differential privacy still work well?
That's a really good point. Differential privacy can be less effective when you're working with small data sets. Sometimes the noise you add can drown out the real signal in the data, making the results less meaningful, maybe even misleading. And applying differential privacy to those really complex tasks, like clustering or classification, while still getting good accuracy, well, that's something researchers are still working on. It's a tough one.
So getting the implementation right, It sounds like it could be pretty demanding, technically speaking. Are there things that can go wrong in the implementation itself?
Yeah, definitely. Implementing differential privacy correctly, it takes a lot of attention to detail. You always have the risk of making a mistake in the algorithm, which could accidentally weaken those privacy guarantees. And then there are these sneaky side channel attacks. They can target the implementation itself. So you have to be on the lookout for those too. It's not just about the math, it's about making sure the whole system is secure.
Okay, so let's put this all together for our listeners. Differential privacy, it's a powerful tool, right? It gives us this mathematically sound framework for analyzing data responsibly. And we need that, especially with AI becoming more and more sophisticated. It's not just about hiding data. It's about adding that carefully controlled noise to make sure that no single person's information can be linked or exposed through analysis, no matter what other information might be out there.
And here's what I think is really exciting when you think about the future. Differential privacy, it can be so important for building trust in how AI is developed. As we train these AI systems on more and more data, differential privacy can help ensure we're using that data responsibly. It's all about finding that sweet spot where we can push forward with innovation in AI, but also make sure we're respecting people's privacy. Those fundamental principles, we can't lose sight of those.
So for you, the listener, what does this all mean? Well, understanding differential privacy, it gives you a new way to look at things, to think about how data is being used and protected in all the tech you use every day. It helps you see that there are these complex issues and trade-offs that we have to consider when we're talking about data analysis and privacy.
And this leads to a really important question, one that I think we all need to be thinking about. As AI becomes even more woven into our lives, how do we as a society, how do we go about setting those privacy parameters, that epsilon and delta, to make sure that we're promoting progress, but also protecting individual privacy in a way that aligns with our values? It's a conversation that's only just beginning, and it has big implications.
Well, thank you for taking this deep dive with us into this fascinating world of differential privacy. If you enjoyed this and you're hungry to learn more about these technologies that are shaping our future, make sure you hit that subscribe button and join us for more discussions here on the Before AGI podcast. And if you're looking to really get hands-on and get even deeper into the world of AI, check out my YouTube channel, Ian Ochieng, Ohechieng AI. Keep exploring, keep asking those tough questions, and we'll catch you in the next one.